The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, thick with legal documents and smelling faintly of dust. Travis Beckham stood in his cramped apartment kitchen, coffee going cold in his hand, staring at words that made no sense strung together. Copper Ridge Ranch. Sole heir. Immediate possession required. His uncle Duncan, a man he hadn't spoken to in 15 years, had left him everything. A ranch Travis didn't want in a valley he'd spent his whole adult life trying to forget. But it was the final line in the lawyer's letter that made his stomach drop. The property taxes are 6 months overdue. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings. You have 30 days. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Travis crumpled the letter, then smoothed it out again. 30 days to salvage a life that wasn't even his. 30 days before some developer turned whatever was left of his family's legacy into a parking lot or a strip mall. He looked around his apartment, at the single room that held everything he owned, at the eviction notice taped to his door that he'd been pretending not to see. Maybe a dying ranch in Montana wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a man who was already broke, alone, and out of options. 3 days later, his truck coughed its way up the winding road into Red Creek Valley, past forests thick with pine and aspen, past fields that rolled gold and green under an endless sky. The valley opened like a secret kept too long, beautiful and somehow sad, as if it knew its own best days were behind it. When Copper Ridge Ranch finally came into view, Travis felt something crack open in his chest. The house sagged at the corners, paint peeling in long strips that curled like dried skin. The barn leaned precariously, its roof patched with mismatched tin. Fences hung broken, wire tangled in tall grass that should have been grazed down months ago. This wasn't inheritance. This was a grave he was supposed to dig himself into. Travis killed the engine and sat in the silence that followed, thick and accusing. A magpie called from somewhere in the cottonwoods. The wind moved through the grass with a sound like whispered warnings. He forced himself out of the truck, boots hitting gravel that crunched too loud. The porch steps groaned under his weight, wood soft with rot. Inside, the house smelled of abandonment, that particular mixture of mildew and time that settles into places where no one lives anymore. Dust coated every surface. Furniture sat draped in sheets like ghosts waiting for permission to leave. Travis moved through rooms that held fragments of a childhood he'd mostly forgotten. The kitchen where his aunt used to make cornbread. The living room where Uncle Duncan would sit by the fire, working leather with hands that never seemed to tire. Photographs lined the mantel, faces Travis recognized but couldn't quite name. He found himself staring at one picture in particular, a young version of his uncle standing beside a dark horse, both of them looking at the camera with identical expressions of quiet defiance. The sound came from outside, sharp and sudden. A crash, then a high whinny that cut through the afternoon stillness. Travis bolted for the back door, nearly tripping over a fallen chair. The barn. He ran across the yard, heart hammering, and threw open the barn doors. The smell hit him first, thick and sour. Manure that hadn't been cleaned in weeks, maybe months. Hay rotted in the corners, black with mold. And there, in the far stall, a horse lay on its side in the filth, ribs showing through dull coat, legs thrashing weakly against the boards. Travis froze, horror washing over him cold as creek water. The horse lifted its head, eyes rolling white, and he saw the distinctive spotted pattern of an Appaloosa beneath the grime and neglect. On its left shoulder, a strange pattern of old scars formed lines that looked almost deliberate, almost like they meant something. The animal tried to stand, failed, collapsed back with a sound that tore at something deep in Travis's gut. He didn't know horses. He'd left the ranch at 17, ran to the city, and never looked back. But he knew suffering when he saw it. He knew what it looked like when a living thing was giving up. Travis backed out of the barn, hands shaking, and fumbled for his phone. No service. Of course. He ran back to the house, found an old landline that miraculously still had a dial tone, and flipped through a phone book so ancient the pages crumbled at the edges. His finger stopped on Fontaine Veterinary Services. He dialed before he could think better of it, before he could calculate what this would cost, before logic could tell him to walk away from all of it. The voice that answered was clipped, professional. Fontaine. Travis stumbled over his words, explaining about the ranch, the horse, the condition he'd found it in. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, Copper Ridge. You must be Duncan's nephew. It wasn't a question. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't try to move him. The line went dead. Travis stood holding the phone, feeling like he'd just set something in motion he couldn't take back. He returned to the barn, slower this time, and approached the stall with his hands visible, the way you might approach anything wild and hurting. The horse watched him, ears flat, breathing labored. Up close, Travis could see the severity of the neglect. Hooves overgrown and cracked, coat matted with filth, eyes sunken with dehydration. But underneath all that, the bone structure of something that had once been magnificent. I'm sorry, Travis heard himself whisper. I didn't know you were here. The horse's ear flicked toward his voice, just slightly. Travis found a bucket, filled it with water from a spigot that sputtered and spat rust before running clear. He set it just inside the stall, close enough for the horse to reach if it could move. Then he backed away and waited. The animal didn't drink, just lay there, sides heaving, as if even the effort of surviving was too much to ask. Travis sank down against the barn wall and put his head in his hands. This was impossible. He had no money, no experience, no business trying to save a ranch or a horse or anything else. He should call the lawyer, sign whatever papers would make this someone else's problem, and get back to his life. Except he didn't have a life to get back to. Just an eviction notice and an empty apartment and the slow grinding certainty that he'd been sleepwalking through his days for years. The rumble of an engine announced the vet's arrival. Travis stood as a dusty pickup pulled into the yard, and a woman in her late 50s climbed out, moving with the efficient purpose of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She wore canvas pants and a work shirt, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, and she carried a veterinary bag that looked like it had been through a war. Dr. Iris Fontaine didn't waste time on introductions. She walked straight to the barn, assessed the situation with a single sweeping glance, and got to work. Travis watched as she examined the horse with hands that were gentle but unsentimental, checking vitals, looking at teeth and eyes and hooves, her expression growing grimmer with each discovery. Finally she stood, wiping her hands on a rag. How long has he been like this? Travis shook his head helplessly. I just got here today. I didn't even know there was a horse. Iris studied him with eyes that missed nothing. Your uncle called me 3 weeks ago, said he was sick, asked if I could look after Ranger until he got back on his feet. Her jaw tightened. I came out twice. Duncan sent me away both times, said he had it handled. Then I heard he died. The name landed heavy between them. Ranger. It fit somehow, this half-wild creature in its prison of neglect. Can you save him? Travis asked, and hated how his voice cracked on the question. Iris was quiet for a long moment. Truthfully? I don't know. He's severely malnourished, dehydrated, probably has hoof rot and who knows what internal damage. Moving him might kill him. Leaving him here definitely will. She fixed Travis with a look that demanded honesty. The question is, are you planning to stay? Travis opened his mouth, then closed it. Was he? Every practical preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Instinct screamed to run. But something about the way Ranger's eye had followed him, the way the horse's ear had turned toward his voice, held him in place. I don't know anything about ranching, he admitted. Or horses. I left here when I was 17 and swore I'd never come back. Iris nodded as if she'd expected as much. Your uncle was a stubborn man. Proud. Wouldn't ask for help even when he was dying. Looks like he passed that trait down. Should have stung, but it just felt true. What do I do? Travis asked. Iris set her bag down and rolled up her sleeves. First, we get fluids in him. Then we clean the stall. Then you decide if you're the kind of man who walks away or the kind who stays. She pulled supplies from her bag, for equipment that looked both sophisticated and improvised. I'll be honest with you, Travis. This valley is dying. Half the ranches have been sold off to developers. The other half are barely hanging on. Your uncle's place is worth more as a subdivision than it ever will be as a working ranch. She threaded a needle with practiced efficiency. But some things aren't about money. They worked through the afternoon as shadows lengthened across the valley. Iris set the fore, her movements confident despite the horse's occasional thrashing. Travis hauled bucket after bucket of filthy straw out of the stall, scrubbed boards until his back ached, spread fresh bedding that he found in a storage shed. Sweat soaked through his shirt. His hands, soft from months of unemployment, blistered and bled. But something about the physical labor felt right, felt like penance for years of absence. By the time the sun touched the western peaks, Ranger was clean, hydrated, and resting more quietly. Iris checked his vitals one final time and nodded with what might have been approval. He's got fight in him still. That's something. She packed her equipment, then paused at the barn door. I'll come back tomorrow. Meanwhile, you need to decide what you're doing here. That horse needs consistent care. This ranch needs more work than one man can do alone. And Victor Drummond is going to come calling the minute he hears Duncan's nephew is in town. The name meant nothing to Travis, and his confusion must have shown. Iris's expression hardened. Drummond Development. They've been trying to buy this property for 2 years. Your uncle refused to sell. Said this land wasn't his to give away, that it held something too important. She met his eyes. Duncan was a lot of things, but he wasn't crazy. If he held on this hard, there was a reason. She climbed into her truck, then leaned out the window. One more thing. That horse? Duncan didn't just own him. He protected him. Ranger was found wandering the north pasture 5 years ago. Half-starved, those scars already on him. No brand, no chip, no way to trace where he came from. Your uncle took him in and never let anyone near that part of the property again. The truck's engine turned over, dust rising in the red evening light. Why? Travis called after her. Iris shrugged. That's what you need to figure out. Then she was gone, taillights disappearing down the valley road, leaving Travis alone with a dying ranch, a broken horse, and questions that had no easy answers. He returned to the barn as twilight settled in, purple and deep. Ranger lay quiet now, the fore-bag dripping steady into his vein, his breathing easier. Travis sat on an overturned bucket, exhausted, and let the day's weight finally settle on him. This was insane. He should call the bank, arrange a quick sale, take whatever money was left after debt and start over somewhere else. Anywhere else. But as he sat there in the gathering dark, listening to Ranger's breathing, Travis realized he was tired of running, tired of starting over, tired of being the kind of man who walked away when things got hard. His uncle had been that man too in his own way, too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to admit when he was beaten. And it had killed him, left him alone in this house with no one to even notice when he stopped breathing. Travis stood, his decision made before he'd fully formed the thought. He'd stay, at least for the 30 days. Long enough to get Ranger back on his feet. Long enough to understand what his uncle had been protecting. Long enough to figure out if this place was worth fighting for or if Iris was right and the valley was just slowly dying, one ranch at a time. He left the barn, crossed the dark yard to the house, and climbed the stairs to what had been his uncle's bedroom. The bed was made with military precision. A journal lay on the nightstand, its leather cover worn smooth with handling. Travis picked it up, feeling like an intruder, but opened it anyway. His uncle's handwriting covered the pages, small and precise. Most of it was mundane. Weather notes, herd counts, expenses, but scattered throughout were other entries, fragments that didn't quite make sense. North pasture fence repaired again. Someone still trying to get through. And later, Ranger led me to the old survey markers today. He knows. Somehow he knows. And on one of the final pages, written in a hand that trembled with weakness. If something happens to me, don't let them take this land. What's buried here changes everything. Ranger will show the way. Travis read the words 3 times, his mind racing. What's buried here? The north pasture. The scars on Ranger's shoulder that looked almost like a map. He thought of Iris's words about Duncan protecting that part of the property, about the horse being found there, about his uncle's refusal to sell no matter how desperate things got. A secret. His uncle had died protecting a secret, and somehow a half-wild horse was the key to finding it. Travis set the journal down and moved to the window, looking out over land he barely remembered but somehow recognized in his bones. The valley lay quiet under stars beginning to emerge, ancient and patient. Somewhere out there was an answer, and starting tomorrow he was going to find it. Travis woke to sunlight cutting through dusty curtains and the disorienting sensation of not knowing where he was. Then it all came back. The ranch, the horse, the impossible choice he'd made in the twilight. He dressed in yesterday's clothes, grimacing at how they stuck to his skin, and made his way downstairs. The kitchen was exactly as he'd left it, lifeless and cold. He searched through cupboards until he found an ancient jar of instant coffee, made a cup with water that ran brown before clearing, and stood at the window watching morning spread gold across the valley. The barn called to him like an accusation. He'd promised himself he'd stay, but in the clear light of morning, that promise felt foolish. Still, he crossed the yard, boots wet with dew, and pushed open the barn door with a creak that split the silence. Ranger was standing. Not well, not strongly, but on his feet, head low, the forebag empty and hanging limp. The horse turned at the sound, and Travis saw something in those dark eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the faintest recognition that he wasn't alone anymore. Travis approached slowly, hands visible, speaking in a low voice that felt ridiculous even as the words came. "Morning, Ranger. Didn't expect you to be up." The horse's ears flicked forward, then back, uncertain. Travis stopped a few feet away, close enough to see how the morning light caught the unusual scarring on Ranger's shoulder. Up close, the pattern was even stranger. Not random at all, but deliberate. Lines that intersected at angles, marks that formed shapes Travis couldn't quite interpret. Like someone had carved a message into living flesh and let it heal into permanent record. The sound of tires on gravel pulled Travis from his examination of the scars. He stepped out of the barn to find Dr. Fontaine's truck pulling up, earlier than expected. She emerged with her veterinary bag and a cardboard box that smelled like heaven. Fresh bread, if Travis wasn't mistaken, and coffee that actually looked drinkable. "Figured you wouldn't have any food in that house," Iris said without preamble, thrusting the box at him. "Can't nurse a horse back to health if you're passing out from hunger." Travis took the box, embarrassed by how grateful he felt. "Thank you. I was going to head into town today." "Town can wait. Let me see him first." Iris moved past Travis into the barn, her assessment professional and thorough. She checked Ranger's vitals, examined his hooves with a critical eye, and made notes in a small leather book she produced from her pocket. After several minutes of silence broken only by Ranger's occasional snort, she nodded. "Better than I expected. He's got more resilience than most. But we're not out of the woods yet." She pulled supplies from her bag and began showing Travis the basics. How to check for dehydration by pinching the skin on Ranger's neck. How to clean hooves properly, though they'd need a farrier soon to deal with the overgrowth. How to mix supplements into feed to help rebuild muscle mass. Travis tried to absorb it all, taking mental notes, feeling overwhelmed by how much he didn't know. "You're thinking too hard," Iris said, catching his expression. "Horses aren't complicated. Food, water, shelter, and time. Most of healing is just showing up every day." She demonstrated how to apply salve to the worst of the skin irritations, her movements practiced and sure. "Your uncle understood that. He wasn't much for fancy veterinary medicine, but he knew how to be present." Travis found himself asking the question that had been burning since last night. "What do you know about the north pasture? Why wouldn't he let anyone up there?" Iris's hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing their work. "That's not my story to tell. But I'll say this, your uncle believed something important was hidden on this land. Something that went back before his time, maybe before his father's time. He spent the last 5 years of his life making sure no one else could get to it. And Ranger, Travis pressed. What's his connection to all this? Iris finished with the salve and straightened, wiping her hands. That horse showed up in the north pasture like he'd been waiting there. Your uncle found him half dead, brought him back here, and from that day on, Ranger wouldn't let anyone else near him. Just Duncan. It was like they had an understanding. She fixed Travis with a penetrating look. Animals know things we don't. They sense what's buried, what's hidden. If your uncle trusted Ranger to guard whatever's up there, there was a reason. The implications hung in the air between them. Before Travis could respond, another vehicle approached, this one sleek and expensive, completely out of place on the dusty ranch road. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the yard, and a man in a suit stepped out, his shoes so polished they caught the morning sun. He was in his 40s, Travis guessed, with the kind of smile that probably worked well in boardrooms but felt predatory here. Travis Beckham? The man called out, approaching with his hand extended. Victor Drummond. I heard Duncan's nephew had finally arrived. Wanted to pay my respects. Travis shook the offered hand, noting how Drummond's grip was just a little too firm, held just a little too long. Word travels fast. Drummond laughed, a practiced sound. Small valley. Everyone knows everyone's business. His eyes swept over the property with barely concealed assessment. I was sorry to hear about your uncle. He was a fixture in this community. You didn't know him, Iris said flatly from the barn entrance. Drummond's smile tightened at the edges. Dr. Fontaine, always a pleasure. He turned back to Travis, dismissing her with the shift of his body. I know you've just arrived, but I wanted to make you an offer before you get too settled in. My company is interested in purchasing Copper Ridge. We're prepared to pay well above market value. Travis felt something cold settle in his stomach. I just got here yesterday. Drummond nodded sympathetically. Of course, and I'm sure it's overwhelming. This place has been neglected for months. The house needs work, the outbuildings are falling apart, and from what I hear, there's substantial debt. You'd be doing yourself a favor by selling now, before you sink any money into repairs. He produced a business card from his pocket, the paper thick and expensive. Think it over, but don't wait too long. The bank won't give you much time, and my offer won't stay on the table forever. What do you want the land for? Travis asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Drummond's smile widened. Development. This valley is ripe for growth. We're talking luxury. Homes, maybe a resort. Red Creek has potential that's been wasted on ranching that barely breaks even. He glanced toward the barn where Ranger stood watching. Hell of a lot better use than keeping a broken-down horse on overgrazed pasture. Travis felt anger flare, sudden and hot. The answer is no. Drummond's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You haven't even heard the offer yet. He named a figure that made Travis's breath catch. It was more money than he'd seen in his entire life, enough to pay off the ranch's debts and leave him with a substantial cushion. Enough to start over somewhere, anywhere else. Still no, Travis heard himself say, surprising himself as much as Drummond. The developer's smile finally cracked. Be smart about this. You're broke, you've got no experience running a ranch, and this place is falling apart. Take the money. Walk away while you can still walk away with something. He climbed back into his SUV, the door closing with an expensive thunk. I'll give you a week to reconsider. After that, I'll be talking to the bank directly. The SUV pulled away, kicking up dust that hung in the still morning air. Travis stood watching it go, his heart pounding. Iris came to stand beside him, her arms crossed. That's the pressure your uncle faced every day for 2 years. Drummond doesn't give up easily. Travis looked at her. What's really going on here? Why does he want this land so badly? That, Iris said slowly, is the question. There are rumors, of course. Old stories about this valley. Some say there's copper in the hills, hence the name. Others claim there's something more valuable. Your uncle believed the truth was in the north pasture, and Ranger was the key to finding it. She headed toward her truck, then paused. A boy will be by this afternoon. Nolan Webb lives a few miles down the road. His father died last year, and he's been taking odd jobs to help his mother keep their place. Your uncle hired him sometimes for fence work. Good kid, quiet but reliable. I can't afford to hire anyone, Travis admitted. Iris climbed into her truck. Then work out a trade. He needs somewhere to go after school. Somewhere that isn't home, where everything reminds him of what he lost. You need help keeping this place from falling down around your ears. Seems like a fair exchange. She started the engine. I'll be back tomorrow to check on Ranger. Meanwhile, get some food in that horse and in yourself. And Travis? Don't let Drummond rattle you. Your uncle stood up to him for years. You can do the same. After she left, Travis stood in the yard for a long moment, feeling the weight of decisions he'd made without fully understanding their consequences. He'd said no to more money than he'd ever seen, committed himself to a place he barely remembered, and taken responsibility for a horse he didn't know how to care for. It was possibly the most foolish thing he'd ever done. He returned to the barn, where Ranger was nosing at the fresh hay Travis had put out earlier. The horse looked up at his approach, and Travis could swear there was something knowing in that dark gaze. Your uncle thought you could show me something, Travis said, feeling ridiculous for talking to an animal. Thought you knew where some secret was hidden. Any chance you want to share that information now? Ranger snorted and returned to his hay. Travis laughed despite himself, the sound echoing in the empty barn. He spent the rest of the morning working, cleaning out the other stalls even though they were empty, organizing the tack room, making lists of everything that needed repair. The physical labor felt good, purposeful in a way his life hadn't felt in years. Around noon, he heard the sound of an old motorcycle approaching. A teenager pulled into the yard on a dirt bike that had seen better days, killed the engine, and removed his helmet to reveal a thin face with serious eyes. He couldn't have been more than 15, all angles and awkward height, wearing jeans torn from use rather than fashion and a faded flannel shirt. You Mr. Beckham? The boy asked, his voice soft. Travis nodded. Travis, you must be Nolan. The boy's eyes went to the barn. Is it true? About Ranger being sick? There was genuine concern in his voice that made Travis warm to him immediately. He was in bad shape when I found him. Dr. Fontaine thinks he'll pull through, but it'll take time. Nolan moved toward the barn without asking permission, and Travis followed. The boy approached Ranger's stall with the confidence of familiarity, speaking in a low voice. Hey old man, heard you've been having a rough time. Ranger lifted his head, ears forward, and made a sound that was almost welcoming. Nolan reached through the bars to scratch the horse's forehead, and Ranger leaned into the touch. You're good with him, Travis observed. Nolan shrugged, embarrassed. Mr. Duncan let me help out sometimes. Ranger's particular about people, but he let me near him. Mr. Duncan said that meant something. He turned to Travis, and there was a question in his eyes. Dr. Fontaine said you might need help around here. Said maybe we could work something out. Travis studied the boy, seeing the pride that made asking difficult, the need that made it necessary. I can't pay much, barely anything, honestly, but if you want to come by after school, help with repairs and looking after Ranger, I can feed you dinner and we'll figure out something fair. Nolan's face brightened, then shuddered again, trying not to show too much hope. What kind of work? Everything, Travis admitted. Fences need mending. The barn roof leaks. Half the equipment in the shed is rusted through. I don't know the first thing about ranching, so mostly I need someone who can show me what needs doing and help me do it. He paused. Dr. Fontaine also said you're good with mechanics. My truck's running rough. Could use someone to look at it. I could do that, Nolan said, and the guardedness in his expression eased slightly. I could come by tomorrow after school. 3:30 or so. Travis extended his hand. Deal. They shook on it, and Travis felt like he'd just made the first good decision since arriving at Copper Ridge. Nolan spent another few minutes with Ranger, speaking to the horse in a voice too low for Travis to hear, before putting his helmet back on and riding away on his rattling motorcycle. Travis watched him go, then returned to his work. As afternoon stretched into evening, he found himself settling into the rhythm of the place. The creak of the barn, the sound of wind through the cottonwoods, Ranger's occasional snort or stomp. It was so different from the city, from the constant noise and motion he'd grown accustomed to. Here, silence had texture. Space had weight. He made himself dinner from the supplies Iris had brought, standing at the kitchen window and watching the sun paint the valley in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere out there was the north pasture, the place his uncle had guarded so carefully. Tomorrow, Travis decided he'd take a walk up there, see what all the secrecy was about. For tonight, though, he was content to be here, in this moment, eating bread and cheese and feeling more grounded than he had in years. After dinner, he returned to the barn for a final check on Ranger. The horse was lying down but alert, and he didn't startle when Travis entered. Travis sat on the overturned bucket, listening to the evening sounds, the horse's breathing, the mice in the rafters, the distant call of an owl. He pulled his uncle's journal from his pocket and flipped through the pages again, looking for clues he might have missed. Most of the entries were mundane, but scattered throughout were observations that seemed significant. References to the north pasture fence being tampered with. Notes about Ranger's behavior, how the horse would pace restlessly when strangers approached, how he'd lead Duncan to specific spots as if trying to communicate something. And then, 3 months before his death, an entry that made Travis's blood run cold. Drummond's people were on the property again today. Found their survey equipment near the old mine shaft. They're getting bolder. Need to move the documents somewhere safer. If anything happens to me, everything depends on someone understanding what Ranger knows. The map is written on him. Anyone with eyes can see it if they know what they're looking for. The map is written on him. Travis looked up at Ranger, at the pattern of scars on the horse's shoulder. Not random at all, he realized now. Deliberate. Intentional. Someone had carved a map into this animal's flesh, and his uncle had protected both the horse and whatever that map led to. But who had done it? And why? Travis stood, moved closer to Ranger's stall. The horse watched him but didn't move away. In the dim light, Travis traced the pattern of the scars with his eyes. Lines intersecting at angles. Marks that could be boundaries or roads. A small circular scar that might represent a landmark. It was incomplete, he realized. Or maybe he just didn't have the context to interpret it correctly. "What are you hiding?" Travis whispered. "What was worth carving into your skin?" Ranger's ears flicked forward, and for a moment Travis could swear the horse understood the question. Understood and was waiting to see if this new human was worthy of the answer. Travis reached out slowly, and this time Ranger didn't pull away. He let Travis rest a hand on his neck, let him feel the solid warmth of living muscle and bone. "We'll figure it out," Travis promised, to the horse or to himself or to his uncle's ghost. "Whatever you've been guarding, whatever my uncle died protecting, we'll figure it out together." He stood there in the gathering dark, one hand on a horse he barely knew, surrounded by questions he didn't have answers for. Outside, the valley settled into night, ancient and patient, holding its secrets close. But for the first time in years, Travis felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of Montana morning that made the air taste like possibility. Travis was up before the sun, checking on Ranger, mixing feed according to Iris's instructions, falling into a routine that felt natural despite being completely foreign. The horse was stronger today, taking the food eagerly, his eyes brighter. Progress measured in small victories. After breakfast, Travis decided it was time to explore the north pasture. He grabbed a water bottle, his uncle's journal, and set out on foot, following the fence line that led away from the barn and up into the hills. The land rose gradually, grass giving way to sage and scrub pine, the soil rocky and pale. It was beautiful country, stark and honest, the kind of landscape that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. The fence was in poor repair, wire sagging in places, posts leaning at drunken angles. But every 100 yards or so, Travis found evidence of recent repairs. New wire, fresh post holes. His uncle's work, he guessed, or maybe Nolan's, maintaining a boundary that someone kept trying to breach. After about half a mile, the land leveled out into a broad meadow, and Travis understood why this place felt different. The grass here was greener, fed by a spring that bubbled up from between rocks near the center. Trees clustered along the edges, providing shade and shelter. It was the kind of spot that would have drawn people for generations. Travis walked slowly, looking for anything that might explain his uncle's obsession with protecting this place. Old fence posts marked a boundary that seemed arbitrary until he realized they followed the natural contours of the land, creating a rough circle around the spring. At the far edge, half hidden by overgrowth, he found what looked like old mining equipment. A rusted winch. Collapsed timber that might have been a shaft entrance. Evidence of excavation from decades past, maybe longer. He pulled out his uncle's journal, flipping to a page where Duncan had sketched a rough map of the property. The north pasture was marked with an X, and beside it, a note. Original survey markers 1880s. Check county records against Drummond's claims. Travis frowned, trying to piece together what that meant. Survey markers would establish property boundaries. If there was a discrepancy between old surveys and new ones, it could affect ownership, mineral rights, water access. Was that what this was about? A legal dispute over where the property lines actually fell? He spent the next hour searching the area, looking for the survey markers his uncle had mentioned. He found 2 of them, stone cairns that had been partially dismantled and rebuilt, as if someone had been examining them. Near one of the cairns, he discovered fresh boot prints in the soft earth near the spring. Not his uncle's old work boots. Someone else had been here recently, and not for casual exploration. Travis photographed the boot prints with his phone, then continued his search. Near the old mine shaft, he found something that made his pulse quicken. A small metal box, the kind used for storing documents, wedged into a crevice between rocks and covered with a flat stone. It was weatherproof, secured with a padlock that had rusted but held. Travis tried to force it, failed, and finally used a rock to break the lock mechanism. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents. Land deeds, survey maps, correspondence dating back to the 1880s. Travis sat on a rock and began reading, his heart pounding as the implications became clear. The original survey of Copper Ridge Ranch, conducted when Montana was still a territory, showed the property line extending much further north than current maps indicated. Somewhere in the intervening years, the boundary had been redrawn, cutting off nearly 50 acres that legally belonged to the ranch. But it wasn't just the land itself that mattered. According to a geological survey from 1923, that 50-acre parcel sat directly over a significant aquifer, a natural underground reservoir that fed not just the spring in the north pasture but potentially supplied water to a dozen properties throughout the valley. Control of that land meant control of the water rights. And in Montana, water rights were worth more than gold. Travis's hands shook as he read through the documents. His uncle had known that the property boundaries were wrong, known that Copper Ridge legally owned water rights that could sustain the ranch and potentially other properties in the valley. Known that Drummond's development plans depended on acquiring those rights. No wonder his uncle had refused to sell. No wonder Drummond had been so persistent. But there was more. A letter from his uncle to a lawyer, dated 6 months before his death, outlining his intention to contest the property boundaries and reclaim the disputed acreage. The lawyer's response was clipped and discouraging. Without the original survey stakes in place, proving the boundary dispute would be nearly impossible. Modern GPS surveys would only confirm the current boundaries unless physical markers could be found that matched the 1880s survey descriptions. Travis looked up from the documents, scanning the meadow with new understanding. The survey stakes, that's what his uncle had been looking for. That's what someone had been trying to find or destroy. And somehow Ranger was connected to it all. The horse had been found in this meadow, bearing scars that looked like a map. What if those scars actually were a map? What if someone had marked the locations of the original survey stakes on the horse's hide, A message that could walk away from the property but never be truly lost. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of thing someone desperate to preserve information might do. Travis stood, his mind racing. He needed to get back to the barn, needed to examine those scars more carefully, needed to compare them to the survey descriptions in the documents. He rewrapped the papers in their oilcloth and carried the metal box with him, no longer content to leave it hidden where someone else might find it. As he made his way back down the hill, he noticed something he'd missed on the way up. Fresh tire tracks in a spot where the fence had been cut and poorly repaired. Someone had driven onto the property recently, headed toward the north pasture. Drummond's people, he guessed, looking for whatever his uncle had been protecting. They hadn't found it yet, but they were getting closer. Travis quickened his pace, suddenly anxious to get back to Ranger, to make sure the horse was safe. The sun was high overhead by the time he reached the barn, and he found Nolan already there, his dirt bike parked outside, the boy's thin frame bent over something in the tack room. Nolan looked up as Travis entered, wiping grease from his hands. "Found your uncle's old surveying equipment," the boy said. "Compass, measuring chain, the works. Looks like he was planning to do his own survey." Travis set the metal box down carefully. "Did he ever talk to you about the north pasture? About what he was looking for up there?" Nolan's expression grew guarded. "Sometimes. He said there were secrets on this land that went back to the beginning. Said the truth was written where no one thought to look." The boy gestured toward Ranger's stall. He used to say Ranger knew more about Copper Ridge's history than any book could tell. Travis moved to the stall, and Ranger lifted his head, ears forward. In the afternoon light streaming through the barn's high windows, the scars on the horse's shoulder seemed to glow, raised lines of pale tissue against darker hide. Travis pulled out his phone, called up the photo he'd taken of the 1880s survey map, and held it next to Ranger's shoulder. His breath caught. The pattern matched. Not perfectly, but close enough to be unmistakable. The lines on Ranger's shoulder corresponded to section boundaries on the old map. The circular scar marked the location of the spring, and 3 small marks, triangular in shape, aligned with the description of survey stakes in the historical document. Someone had literally carved a map onto this horse, preserving information that would have been lost or destroyed otherwise. "Nolan," Travis said, his voice shaking slightly, "get a pen and paper. I need you to help me sketch this pattern exactly as it appears." The boy didn't ask questions, just retrieved a notebook and began drawing while Travis held his phone's flashlight at different angles to make the scars more visible. They worked for over an hour, creating a detailed reproduction of the markings, comparing it to the survey documents, making notes about scale and orientation. When they finished, Travis sat back, the full picture finally clear. The triangular marks on Ranger's shoulder represented the locations of the original survey stakes, the ones that would prove Copper Ridge's true boundaries. His uncle had found them, documented them, and then someone had captured Ranger and carved that information onto the horse's hide, either as backup documentation or as a way to hide it in plain sight. But who and why? Travis flipped through his uncle's journal again, looking for any mention of who might have done this. Near the end, he found an entry that made his stomach turn. "Drummond's men took Ranger last month. Had him for 3 days before I tracked them down. Found him in bad shape, those marks fresh on his shoulder. They thought they were sending me a message, showing they could take what mattered to me. They didn't realize they'd just given me proof of where the stakes are buried. Fools marked their own defeat on living flesh." So Drummond's people had carved the map, probably torturing the information out of his uncle before marking it on the horse as some kind of twisted trophy. But Duncan had turned it around, used their cruelty against them. The horse they'd scarred was now walking evidence of the true property boundaries. All Travis had to do was find the physical stakes where the map indicated they'd be, and he could prove Copper Ridge's legal claim to the disputed acreage and the water rights that came with it. The sun had barely cleared the eastern peaks when Travis found himself back in the north pasture, Nolan beside him carrying surveying equipment they'd found in his uncle's shed. The morning air was crisp enough to burn the lungs, and their breath created small clouds that dissipated quickly in the breeze. Ranger had shown remarkable improvement over the past few days. strong enough now that Travis had decided to bring him along, the horse following on a lead rope with surprising willingness. Travis had spent the previous evening studying the sketch they'd made of Ranger's scars, comparing it to the survey documents, calculating distances and angles. If his interpretation was correct, the first survey stake should be located approximately 200 yards northwest of the spring, near a distinctive rock formation the 1880s surveyor had described as resembling a crouching bear. They'd found that formation yesterday, though time and weather had softened its ursine appearance to something more ambiguous. Nolan set up the measuring chain while Travis consulted the compass, trying to account for magnetic declination over the century and a half since the original survey. The math made his head hurt, but the boy had a natural aptitude for it, adjusting their calculations with quiet confidence. They worked in near silence, the only sounds the clink of equipment, the whisper of wind through sage, and Ranger's occasional snort. The horse had been acting strangely since they'd entered the pasture, ears constantly swiveling, nostrils flaring as if catching scent of something Travis couldn't detect. Every so often Ranger would pull toward a specific direction, then settle when Travis didn't follow. It reminded him of his uncle's journal entries about the horse trying to lead him places, as if the animal understood something fundamental about this land that humans had forgotten. They'd been searching for nearly an hour, probing the earth with a metal rod in the area their calculations indicated, when Ranger suddenly jerked hard on the lead rope. Travis stumbled, nearly losing his grip, as the horse pulled toward a cluster of sage 20 feet to their left. The animal stopped at a spot that looked no different from any other patch of ground and began pawing, his hoof striking earth with deliberate force. Travis and Nolan exchanged glances, then moved to where Ranger stood. The boy dropped to his knees and began clearing away loose soil and dead vegetation. 6 inches down, his fingers struck something solid. Stone, but not natural bedrock. Worked stone shaped by human hands. They dug faster, and within minutes had uncovered a carved marker, weathered but unmistakable. On its face, barely visible beneath decades of erosion, were initials and a date. T.M. 1882. Travis sat back on his heels, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was it. Physical proof that the original survey boundaries were exactly where the old documents claimed. With this stake and the others located, they could establish Copper Ridge's true property line, prove ownership of the disputed acreage and the water rights. Everything Drummond wanted, everything his uncle had died protecting, came down to these carved stones buried in the earth. Nolan was grinning, a rare, unguarded expression that made him look younger than his 15 years. Mr. Duncan was right. Ranger knew exactly where it was. Travis stroked the horse's neck, overwhelmed by a gratitude he couldn't put into words. The animal leaned into his touch, and Travis understood with sudden clarity why his uncle had protected this horse so fiercely. Ranger wasn't just evidence. He was a partner in this, chosen or shaped by circumstance into the keeper of secrets that could save or doom this land. They photographed the marker from every angle, documented its exact position with GPS coordinates, then carefully reburied it. Travis wanted to locate all 3 stakes before revealing what they'd found, wanted ironclad proof before facing Drummond or the bank or anyone else who might challenge his claim. According to the map on Ranger's shoulder, the second stake should be roughly 300 yards due east, near what the survey described as a lightning-struck pine. Finding a specific tree from a description written in 1882 should have been impossible, but the land itself offered clues. Dead pine stumps dotted the hillside, ancient casualties of storms and time. They began checking each one, and Ranger again proved invaluable, leading them past obvious candidates to a stump so old it had become part of the landscape, more fossil than wood. Beneath it, they found the second marker, its inscription identical to the first but for a different surveyor's initial. H.K. 1882. By the time they located the third stake, buried near the old mine shaft in a spot Ranger led them to without hesitation. The sun was high overhead and Travis's hands were raw from digging. But triumph sang in his veins like electricity. They had all 3 markers documented, photographed, verified against the historical surveys. The property line was exactly where his uncle had claimed, which meant Copper Ridge Ranch legally owned 50 acres Drummond thought he could develop, and more importantly, owned rights to the aquifer that could sustain this valley for generations. Travis stood at the edge of the north pasture, looking down at the ranch spread below. The house with its peeling paint, the barn with its sagging roof, the fences that needed mending and the fields that needed work. It was still a dying ranch on borrowed time, but now it had something else. It had hope. It had a fighting chance. And it had proof that some things were worth protecting even when the world said to let them go. They made their way back down the hill, exhausted but energized, Ranger walking steadily between them. As they approached the barn, Travis noticed a vehicle in the yard. Not Drummond's black SUV, but a county sheriff's truck. Rita Caldwell stood waiting, her uniform crisp despite the dust. Her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. "Travis Beckham?" she asked, though her tone made clear she already knew the answer. "I'm Sheriff Caldwell. Mind if we talk?" Travis handed Ranger's lead to Nolan and nodded. "What's this about?" Rita gestured toward the house, indicating they should speak privately. Once inside, she got straight to the point. "Had a complaint filed yesterday. Trespassing, tampering with property markers, harassment. Victor Drummond claims you've been making threats, interfering with his survey team, trying to intimidate his employees." Travis felt cold spread through his chest. "That's a lie. I haven't spoken to Drummond since he showed up here offering to buy the place. And his survey team are the ones trespassing. This is my land." Rita held up a hand. "I'm not saying I believe him. I'm telling you what was filed. Drummond's also petitioned to have this property declared abandoned and moved to accelerated foreclosure proceedings. Says the ranch is a public safety hazard, claims that horse out there is dangerous and should be seized by animal control." The walls seemed to close in. This was Drummond's play, Travis realized. Make it impossible to stay. Tie him up in legal battles he couldn't afford to fight. Force a sale by making holding on to the property more trouble than it was worth. His uncle had faced the same tactics and held out, but at what cost? The isolation, the stress, the paranoia that eventually killed him. "What happens now?" Travis asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Rita studied him for a long moment. "Now I do my job. I investigate the complaints, look at the evidence, make a determination. But I'll be straight with you, Drummond has money and lawyers and connections all the way to the state capital. You're going to need more than righteous indignation to fight this." She paused. "Your uncle was a friend of mine. Good man, stubborn as they come. He believed this land mattered, that keeping it out of Drummond's hands mattered. If you've got proof of what he was protecting, now would be the time to show it." Travis made a decision in that moment, the kind that couldn't be unmade. "Follow me." He led her to the barn, where Nolan was brushing Ranger down, the boy's movements gentle and practiced. Travis retrieved the metal box from where he'd hidden it in the tack room, laid out the documents on a hay bale, and explained everything. The disputed boundaries, the water rights, the survey markers they'd found. And finally, the map carved into Ranger's flesh, proof that Drummond's people had tortured information from his uncle and marked it on the horse, never realizing they were creating evidence of their own crimes. Rita examined the documents carefully, her expression growing more serious with each page. She photographed the scars on Ranger's shoulder, compared them to the survey sketches, and when she finally looked up, her eyes were hard with anger. "This changes everything. If what you're showing me is authentic, Drummond doesn't just lose his development deal. He's looking at charges: assault, animal cruelty, conspiracy to commit fraud." She rolled the documents back up. "But we need to do this right. Chain of evidence, proper documentation, verification from the county surveyor's office. Can you hold on here for a few more days while I build a case?" Travis thought of the bank's deadline, of Drummond's threats, of how vulnerable he was out here alone with a recovering horse and a boy who came by after school. But he also thought of his uncle's journal, of the words written in a failing hand. "Don't let them take this land. What's buried here changes everything." "I can hold on," he said. Rita nodded. "Then I'll make sure you don't have to do it alone. I'm posting a deputy on the property until this gets sorted." Anyone comes onto this land without permission, they'll answer to the law. She headed toward her truck, then turned back. Your uncle stood alone for 2 years. Time someone stood with you. After she left, Travis found himself shaking, the adrenaline of the day finally catching up with him. Nolan appeared at his elbow, his thin face creased with worry. Is it going to be okay? The boy asked, and Travis heard the echo of all the times Nolan must have asked that question in the past year, watching his own world crumble after his father's death. Travis wanted to give easy reassurance, wanted to promise that everything would work out fine. But he'd learned the cost of empty promises, so instead he told the truth. I don't know, but we've got proof now, and we've got the law on our side, and we've got each other. That's more than my uncle had. He met Nolan's eyes. Whatever happens, we see it through together. Deal? The boy nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. They spent the rest of the afternoon working, mending fence, mucking stalls, falling into the rhythm of labor that made thinking unnecessary. Ranger grazed peacefully in the small paddock they'd set up near the barn, and watching the horse move freely, seeing the strength returning to muscles that had been wasting away, Travis felt something uncurl in his chest. This was what his uncle had fought for. Not just the land or the water rights or the legal victory. This, the simple right to care for something, to show up every day and do the work that needed doing, to stand in defense of things that couldn't defend themselves. There was dignity in it, purpose in it, a kind of meaning Travis had been missing in his years of drifting from job to job, city to city, never committing to anything because commitment meant the possibility of loss. As evening painted the valley in shades of amber and rose, Dr. Fontaine's truck pulled into the yard. She'd been coming daily to check on Ranger, but today she brought someone with her. Pastor Hugh Brennan emerged from the passenger side, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands gnarled from a lifetime of work that had nothing to do with preaching. Travis had seen him at his uncle's funeral, delivering a eulogy that spoke of integrity and stubbornness in equal measure. Iris got straight to business, examining Ranger with her usual thoroughness before declaring him well on his way to full recovery. Another week of good feed and care, and he'll be strong as he ever was. She looked at Travis. Heard about Drummond's complaint. Half the valley's heard by now. Word travels. Hugh spoke up, his voice carrying the soft authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Came to tell you that you're not alone in this. Your uncle had friends, even if he didn't always act like it. Folks who remember what this valley was before developers started carving it up for profit. Travis felt something warm bloom in his chest. I appreciate that, but I don't want to drag anyone else into this fight. Hugh smiled. Son, we were in this fight long before you arrived. Drummond's been pressuring families to sell for years. Some have given in, some are holding on by their fingernails. What you found up in that north pasture, those survey markers and water rights, that affects more than just Copper Ridge. If this ranch controls the aquifer, that means Drummond can't monopolize the valley's water supply. Every rancher, every family trying to make a living here, has a stake in you winning this. Iris nodded her agreement. Tomorrow's Sunday. Pastor Hugh's giving a sermon at the community center. Half the valley will be there. Might be a good time for you to show your face. Let people know you're planning to stay, that you're fighting for more than just yourself. The thought of standing in front of a crowd, of making his private struggle public, made Travis's stomach clench. But he understood the strategy. Drummond thrived in shadows, in private negotiations and backroom deals. Bringing this into the light, making it a community issue rather than a personal dispute, changed the dynamics entirely. I'll be there, Travis said, and saw approval flash in both their eyes. After they left, as twilight deepened into night, Travis sat on the porch with Ranger grazing nearby, the horse visible in the last of the light. Nolan had gone home an hour ago, promising to return after church tomorrow. The deputy Rita had posted was parked at the end of the drive, a visible deterrent to anyone who might consider causing trouble. For the first time since arriving at Copper Ridge, Travis felt like he might actually have a chance. He pulled out his uncle's journal, reading by the light of a lantern he'd hung from the porch beam. Near the very end, Duncan had written words that now felt like they'd been meant for Travis all along. A man's legacy isn't measured in acres or assets. It's measured in what he refuses to abandon when abandoning would be easier. This land has taught me that. Ranger has taught me that. Whatever comes, I won't be the one who let it all slip away. Someone will come after me. Someone will understand why this mattered. And they'll have the courage to finish what I started. Travis closed the journal, his throat tight. He hadn't understood when he'd first arrived, hadn't grasped why his uncle had been so desperate to hold onto a dying ranch. But he understood now. This wasn't about profit or success in any conventional sense. It was about refusing to let the world be diminished, about standing firm when everything else was being swept away by forces that reduced land and water and life itself to transactions on a spreadsheet. His uncle had stood alone, but Travis didn't have to. Tomorrow he'd stand in front of the valley and make his choice public. He'd cast his lot with this place, this horse, this fight. And whatever came after, at least he'd know he hadn't walked away when walking away was the easier path. Ranger lifted his head from grazing and moved toward the porch, stopping just at the edge of the circle of light. The horse looked at Travis with those dark, knowing eyes, and Travis could swear there was understanding there, recognition that something fundamental had shifted. He stood and walked to Ranger, resting his forehead briefly against the horse's neck, breathing in the smell of hay and horse and Montana earth. "We're in this together now," he whispered. "Whatever happens, we see it through." The horse exhaled warm breath against his shoulder, a sound like agreement. And in the vast quiet of the valley night, with stars emerging overhead and the first chill of autumn in the air, Travis Beckham felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he was home. Not the home of his childhood, not the place he'd fled from at 17. But home in a deeper sense, the kind you choose rather than inherit, the kind you fight for rather than simply occupy. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Drummond wouldn't give up easily. The bank still held the power to foreclose. And proving the property boundaries in court would take time and money Travis didn't have. But tonight, standing in the lamplight with a horse who'd survived torture and neglect, on land that held secrets worth protecting, Travis felt equal to whatever came next. He thought of the survey stakes buried in the north pasture, of the map written in scar tissue on Ranger's shoulder, of his uncle's journal and its pages of careful documentation. Evidence. Proof. Truth. These were weapons more powerful than any Drummond could deploy. The developer trafficked in intimidation and manipulation, in legal maneuvers and financial pressure. But Travis had something Drummond couldn't buy or threaten away. He had the truth. And truth, Travis was beginning to understand, had a weight of its own. A gravity that pulled people toward it, that made lies and deceptions eventually collapse under their own emptiness. He returned to the porch and sat watching Ranger graze, the peaceful rhythm of the horse's movements meditative in the darkness. The deputy's vehicle remained stationed at the drive's entrance, a silent guardian. From somewhere in the hills, a coyote called, and another answered. The valley was alive with sounds Travis was only beginning to recognize, a language he was slowly learning to speak. He stayed there until the cold drove him inside, reluctant to leave even the small circle of lamplight. Tomorrow would be Sunday, would be the community gathering, would be the moment he stepped fully into this fight. But tonight was just for sitting, for being present, for letting the weight of decision settle into his bones and become part of who he was. When he finally went inside, he left the porch light burning. A small beacon in the darkness, a signal that someone was home, that Copper Ridge Ranch was not abandoned, that this land had a defender again. Upstairs in his uncle's room, Travis lay down without undressing, exhausted to his core but strangely peaceful. Through the open window he could hear Ranger moving in the paddock, the soft sounds of the horse settling for the night. Travis closed his eyes and for the first time in days, perhaps in years, he slept without the weight of aimlessness pressing down on him. He had a purpose now. He had something to protect. And in protecting it, he was discovering that some part of himself, long buried or forgotten, was coming back to life. The part that believed things mattered. The part that was willing to stand and fight for what mattered. The part his uncle had recognized and called to across the years, across death itself, through words in a journal and secrets hidden in the earth. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the real battle. But tonight, Travis Beckham slept the sleep of someone who'd finally found where they belonged. Sunday morning arrived with a clarity that made the valley look newly minted, every detail sharp against the enormous sky. Travis stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to make himself presentable with the limited wardrobe he'd brought. A clean shirt, jeans that weren't work-stained, boots he'd wiped down. It would have to do. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, just show respect for people who were giving him a chance he probably didn't deserve. Nolan arrived early, his dirt bike rattling into the yard just after breakfast. The boy had cleaned up too, his hair still damp from a recent shower, wearing clothes that looked like they might have been his father's, slightly too large in the shoulders. They fed Ranger together in companionable silence, and Travis found himself grateful for the boy's presence. Having someone else in this fight made it feel less impossible, less like throwing himself against an immovable wall. The community center sat at the edge of Pinewood, a modest building that had served as everything from courthouse to dance hall over its 100-year history. By the time Travis and Nolan arrived, trucks and cars already filled the gravel lot, families streaming through the doors in their Sunday clothes. Travis felt every eye turn toward him as he entered, felt the weight of curiosity and judgment and hope all mixed together in those stares. Pastor Hugh stood at the front of the room, talking quietly with Sheriff Caldwell. When he spotted Travis, he nodded and gestured for him to come forward. Travis's stomach clenched, but he made himself walk down the center aisle, Nolan trailing slightly behind. The room held maybe 70 people, families Travis didn't know but who clearly knew of him, knew his uncle, knew the stakes of what was happening at Copper Ridge Ranch. Hugh waited until the murmur of conversation died down, then spoke in that voice that carried without shouting. Friends, we've gathered today not just for worship but for witness. We're here to talk about something that affects every person in this valley, whether they realize it yet or not. He gestured to Travis. This is Travis Beckham, Duncan's nephew. Some of you remember him as a boy. Most of you have only heard his name in the past week. He's got something to share with us, something that changes our understanding of what's at stake in Red Creek Valley. Travis's mouth went dry. He hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't thought about what he'd actually say when faced with all these people. But Hugh's steady gaze held encouragement, and Travis found his voice. I didn't come back here planning to stay. Truth is, I came back because I was out of options. My uncle left me a ranch that's falling apart, debts I can't pay, and a horse that was half dead from neglect. His honesty seemed to surprise some in the crowd, but he continued. I was ready to sell, take whatever money I could get, and disappear again. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But then I started finding things. Documents my uncle had hidden. Survey markers that prove Copper Ridge's property line is different from what modern maps show. Evidence that this ranch legally owns rights to the aquifer that feeds most of this valley. A ripple went through the crowd, people leaning forward, expressions sharpening with interest. Victor Drummond wants that land. He's been trying to buy it for years, and when my uncle wouldn't sell, Drummond's people got desperate. They tortured my uncle for information, and when that didn't work, they took his horse and carved a map onto the animal's skin, marking where the original survey stakes were buried. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Travis saw anger flash across faces, saw fists clench and jaws tighten. He pressed on. Sheriff Caldwell has all the evidence now. The documents, photographs of the survey markers, everything needed to prove Copper Ridge's legal boundaries. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't just about my ranch. If Drummond gets control of that land, he controls the water. He can decide who gets access and who doesn't. He can charge whatever he wants. He can turn this valley into something unrecognizable. A man near the back stood, weathered face serious beneath a worn baseball cap. What are you asking from us? Travis met his eyes. Nothing except witness. I can't fight this alone, and I won't pretend I can. My uncle stood alone for 2 years and it killed him. I'm asking you to stand with me, not with money or force, just with presence. Let Drummond know that if he comes for Copper Ridge, he's coming for all of us. The room erupted into conversation, voices overlapping, people turning to their neighbors to debate and discuss. Hugh let it run for a minute, then raised his hands for quiet. Friends, let's remember who we are. This valley was built by people who looked out for each other, who understood that we're stronger together than alone. Now we've got a chance to prove we still believe that. A woman Travis didn't recognize stood. Her gray hair pulled back severely, her expression fierce. My husband and I have been holding on to our place by our fingernails. Drummond offered us money last month. Said it was the last chance we'd get. We said no because this land matters more than convenience. If Travis is willing to fight, we'll stand with him. Others began standing too, one after another, voices adding to the chorus of support. Not everyone, Travis noticed. Some remained seated, faces skeptical or fearful. But enough rose that Travis felt something loosen in his chest, felt the isolation that had been crushing him ease just slightly. Sheriff Caldwell stepped forward then, her uniform lending official weight to the proceedings. I want to be clear about what's happening here. The evidence Travis has provided is substantial, but prosecuting someone like Drummond takes time. He's got lawyers and resources most of us can't match. What we can do is make sure this plays out in the light, where everyone can see. I forwarded everything to the county attorney's office. There'll be an investigation. But meanwhile, Copper Ridge Ranch is under official protection. Anyone trespassing, anyone interfering with Travis's legal right to occupy that property, answers to me. She looked directly at Travis. You've got 30 days before the bank can move on foreclosure. I'd suggest using that time to get the property properly surveyed, get official documentation of those boundary markers, and file your claim with the county. It won't be cheap and it won't be quick, but it's the only way to make this stick. Travis nodded, his mind already racing through logistics he didn't fully understand. How much would a professional survey cost? Where would he get the money? How could he possibly navigate the legal system without an attorney he couldn't afford? As if reading his thoughts, Hugh spoke up again. The church has a discretionary fund for community emergencies. I'd say this qualifies. We can cover the survey costs. A murmur of agreement ran through the assembled crowd. Others called out offers. A lawyer from the next county over who'd help pro bono. Families willing to provide labor for ranch repairs. A feed store owner who'd extend credit until Travis got on his feet. The generosity stunned him, made his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. The gathering broke up slowly after that, people clustering in small groups, some approaching Travis to shake his hand or offer encouragement. Nolan stayed close, and Travis was grateful for the anchor of the boy's presence. An older rancher with kind eyes gripped Travis's shoulder. Your uncle was a good man, even if he didn't make it easy to be his friend. He'd be proud you're seeing this through. Travis could only nod, not trusting his voice. Dr. Fontaine appeared at his elbow as the crowd thinned. There's someone you need to meet. She gestured toward a man standing near the door, mid-50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. Jack Morrison. He's the county surveyor and he knew your uncle. Travis followed Iris across the room, and Jack extended his hand with a grip that was firm without being aggressive. Duncan talked about you sometimes. Said you'd run off to make something of yourself in the city. Guess that didn't work out the way you planned. There was no judgment in his tone, just observation. Travis found himself relaxing slightly. Not exactly. Jack studied him for a moment. Hugh tells me you found the original survey markers. I'd like to see them, verify them against the territorial records. If they're authentic, and if they match the descriptions in the 1882 survey, that's legally binding evidence. Modern surveys don't supersede historical ones unless there's proof of error. And from what I understand, there wasn't any error, just convenient forgetting. Travis felt a surge of hope. When can we do this? Jack pulled out a battered day planner. I can be at Copper Ridge tomorrow morning. Bring the documents you found. Show me where the markers are buried, and we'll do a proper verification. It'll take a few days to complete the full survey and file the official report, but once that's done, Drummond's claim to that land evaporates. He paused. I should tell you, Drummond's people approached me 6 months ago, wanted me to do a survey that would support their boundary interpretation. I refused. That's when they brought in someone from out of state, someone who was willing to be less rigorous about historical documentation. The pieces were falling into place, the full scope of Drummond's manipulation becoming clear. Travis thanked Jack, agreed to meet him at first light, and finally made his way outside with Nolan. The morning had stretched into afternoon, and Travis felt wrung out from the intensity of so many eyes, so much expectation. They drove back to Copper Ridge in silence, both processing what had happened, what it meant that the valley had chosen to stand with them. Ranger was waiting at the fence when they arrived, ears pricked forward, and something about the horse's solid presence steadied Travis. He'd been alone for so long, trusting nothing and no one, that this sudden wealth of support felt almost dangerous, like something that could be taken away as quickly as it had been given. But standing there with Nolan at his side and Ranger nosing his palm for treats, Travis allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. They spent the afternoon preparing for Jack Morrison's visit, organizing the documents, creating a detailed map showing where each survey marker had been found, gathering everything that would help verify the property boundaries. The deputy remained posted at the entrance, and twice Travis saw unfamiliar vehicles slow as they passed, drivers craning to see what was happening at the ranch. Word was spreading, the confrontation moving from private dispute to public spectacle. As evening settled, Dr. Fontaine returned with a truck full of supplies donated by families from the church. Feed for Ranger, groceries for Travis, even basic tools and building materials for repairs. People wanted to help, she said simply when Travis tried to protest. Let them. Pride's a luxury you can't afford right now. She was right, and Travis knew it. He helped her unload, storing everything carefully, and when she finally left, he found himself standing in the barn surrounded by evidence of community support, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from isolation to connection. Nolan had stayed later than usual, reluctant to leave, and Travis understood the feeling. The boy's own home held ghosts, memories of loss that made being elsewhere easier than being there. You can stay for dinner if you want, Travis offered. Not much, but better than eating alone. Nolan's face brightened, and they cobbled together a meal from the donated groceries, eating on the porch as darkness gathered. They didn't talk much, just sat in companionable quiet, and Travis realized this was what his uncle must have felt. The simple peace of not being alone, of sharing space with someone who understood that silence could be its own conversation. After Nolan left, Travis made his final check on Ranger. The horse was thriving now, his coat glossy, his eyes bright, all traces of the near-death creature Travis had found just weeks ago erased. Ranger nuzzled Travis's shoulder, and Travis buried his hand in the horse's mane, feeling the solid warmth of living muscle and bone. Tomorrow we prove it, he whispered. Tomorrow we show them the truth, and then we see if truth actually matters. He slept fitfully that night, dreams full of his uncle's face, of survey markers that crumbled when touched, of Ranger trying to tell him something he couldn't quite understand. When dawn finally came, Travis was already awake, coffee brewing, nerves singing with anticipation. Jack Morrison arrived exactly on time, driving a truck loaded with professional surveying equipment. Behind him came Sheriff Caldwell and, to Travis's surprise, Pastor Hugh and half a dozen other people from the church gathering. Jack saw Travis's confusion and smiled. Verification requires witnesses. The more people who can testify to what we find, the harder it is for anyone to claim the evidence was manufactured. They made their way to the north pasture as the sun climbed higher, the group moving with purpose across land Travis was beginning to know intimately. Ranger followed without being asked, as if understanding the importance of what was happening. When they reached the first marker's location, Jack set up his equipment with practiced efficiency while Travis carefully excavated the stone. The surveyor examined it in silence, comparing the carving to photographs from the territorial archives he'd brought with him. After several minutes of measurement and calculation, he looked up, his expression serious. This is authentic. The stone composition matches other markers from the 1880s surveys, the weathering patterns are consistent with age, and the inscription matches the surveyor's known style. This is Thomas Miller's work, no question. A murmur ran through the assembled witnesses. They moved to the second marker, then the third, and each time Jack's verdict was the same. Authentic, verifiable, legally binding. By the time they returned to the ranch house, it was mid-afternoon and Jack was already drafting his official report. I'll need a few days to complete the full property survey and file everything with the county, but based on what we've found today, there's no question. Copper Ridge Ranch's legal boundaries extend exactly where the 1882 survey indicated. That means you own the disputed acreage and hold primary water rights to the aquifer. He looked at Travis directly. This changes everything. Drummond's development plans are dead. The valley's water supply stays under local control. Your uncle was protecting something far more valuable than he probably realized. Travis felt dizzy with the enormity of it. They'd done it, proven the truth, established the legal claim. All the pieces his uncle had protected, all the sacrifice and stubbornness, had led to this moment. Hugh clapped him on the shoulder. Your uncle would be proud. He held the line long enough for you to finish the fight. The witnesses began dispersing, heading back to their own lives and responsibilities, but the sense of shared victory remained. Travis stood in the yard watching them go, feeling fundamentally changed by what they'd accomplished together. Sheriff Caldwell was the last to leave. She handed Travis a thick envelope. Official notice. The investigation into Drummond's activities is proceeding. We've got enough evidence to charge several of his employees with animal cruelty, trespassing, and conspiracy. Drummond himself is claiming he knew nothing about what his people were doing, but that defense won't hold up. He's facing civil liability at minimum, possibly criminal charges depending on what else we uncover. She paused at her truck door. You should know, he's not going to take this quietly. Men like Drummond don't accept defeat gracefully. Watch yourself. The warning hung in the air after she drove away. Travis returned to the barn where Ranger was, resting in his stall, and sat on the overturned bucket that had become his thinking spot. The horse opened one eye, regarded Travis calmly, then settled back into rest. Travis pulled out his uncle's journal, reading through the final entries again, and this time the words felt like prophecy fulfilled. Someone will come after me. Someone will understand why this mattered, and they'll have the courage to finish what I started. Travis had finished it. Not alone, never alone, but finished it nonetheless. The property was secure. The water rights established. Drummond's schemes exposed. His uncle's legacy protected. But sitting there in the quiet barn, Travis realized the real victory wasn't legal or financial. It was simpler and more profound than that. He'd found a reason to stay. Found people worth fighting alongside. Found a purpose that made getting up each morning feel meaningful rather than merely necessary. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. The professional survey was completed and filed. The bank, seeing that the property's value had been substantially underestimated, agreed to restructure the loans on much better terms. Drummond's employees were formally charged, and while Drummond himself managed to avoid criminal prosecution, the civil suits filed by Travis and others ruined his reputation and ended his development company's operations in the valley. The community rallied around Copper Ridge in ways Travis never could have imagined. Families volunteered labor for repairs. Local businesses extended credit. Even the weather seemed to cooperate, mild autumn days perfect for the work of rebuilding. Nolan became a permanent fixture at the ranch, arriving after school each day and often staying until dark. The boy's mechanical skills proved invaluable, getting ancient equipment running again, rigging solutions to problems Travis wouldn't have known how to solve. More than that, Nolan brought life to the place, his quiet presence filling spaces that had been empty too long. Travis found himself thinking about the future in concrete terms. What crops to plant come spring, whether to bring in cattle or focus on something else. How to make the ranch not just survive but thrive. Dr. Fontaine's visits became less about veterinary care and more about friendship, her practical wisdom helping Travis navigate challenges he'd never faced before. She'd lost her own husband years ago. She told him one evening, understood what it meant to rebuild a life from wreckage. They didn't talk about anything serious, just shared coffee on the porch while Ranger grazed nearby. But Travis found himself looking forward to those visits, to the easy companionship of someone who expected nothing from him except honesty. Winter arrived early that year, the first snow falling in mid-November, transforming the valley into something crystalline and new. Travis stood at the fence watching Ranger roll in the fresh powder, the horse's joy uncomplicated and infectious. The scars on Ranger's shoulder were still visible beneath his winter coat, but they'd become something different. Not a map of trauma but a testament to survival, to the stubborn refusal to let cruelty have the final word. On a cold December morning, Travis received a letter from the county attorney's office. The civil suit against Drummond Development had been settled. The company was dissolved, its assets liquidated, and Travis's share of the settlement was substantial enough to not just clear Copper Ridge's remaining debts but provide working capital for years. He sat at the kitchen table staring at the figure, unable to quite process what it meant. Security, options, the freedom to make choices based on what he wanted rather than what necessity demanded. That evening he called Nolan's mother, a woman he'd met only briefly, and made an offer he'd been considering for weeks. Room and board for Nolan in exchange for continued work at the ranch. The boy could finish high school in Pinewood, have a stable place to be, and learn skills that might serve him whatever path he chose after graduation. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then quiet crying as she accepted, admitting that she'd been struggling to keep food on the table and her son fed, that knowing he had somewhere safe to be lifted a weight she'd been carrying alone. Christmas came, and Travis found himself hosting a gathering at Copper Ridge. Nothing fancy, just neighbors and friends, people who'd stood with him when standing had mattered. They filled the farmhouse with warmth and noise, and Travis realized this was what his uncle had been missing in his final years. Not just the land or the water rights or the victory over Drummond, but this connection, community, the sense of being part of something larger than individual survival. Pastor Hugh offered a blessing before the meal, his words simple and profound. "We thank you for second chances, for the courage to stay when leaving would be easier, for the stubborn hope that refuses to accept defeat. Bless this house, this land, and all who find shelter here." Travis looked around the table at faces that had become familiar. Iris with her dry humor and steady competence. Jack Morrison and his wife, both weathered and kind. Sheriff Caldwell, off-duty but still carrying herself with that quiet authority. Nolan, looking more settled than Travis had ever seen him. And through the window, visible in the yard lights, Ranger stood watch, the horse who'd started it all. After everyone left, Travis walked out to the barn, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders against the cold. Ranger nickered softly at his approach, and Travis let himself into the stall, sitting in the straw while the horse dozed standing. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the desperation and anger and fear that had propelled him back to a place he'd sworn never to return. How close he'd come to walking away, to letting it all slip through his fingers because holding on felt impossible. But he'd held on. Not because he was particularly brave or strong or capable, but because a dying horse had needed him. Because a boy grieving his father had needed somewhere to belong. Because an entire valley had been waiting for someone to stand up and say enough. And in holding on for them, he'd discovered he was holding on for himself too. Reclaiming something he'd lost or maybe never had. The sense that his life mattered, that his choices had weight, that he could be part of something worth protecting. Spring would come, Travis knew. The work would continue. Seasons turning, challenges arising and being met. But sitting there in the quiet barn with Ranger's steady breathing nearby, Travis felt at peace in a way he'd never quite managed before. He'd found his way home, not to the place he'd been but to the place he was becoming. And that, he thought, was the real secret his uncle had been protecting all along. Not land or water or legal documents, but the understanding that some things were worth fighting for even when the fight seemed impossible. Especially then. Travis stood, brushed straw from his jeans, and gave Ranger a final pat. The horse opened one eye, regarded him with what might have been approval, then settled back into sleep. Travis left the barn, crossing the yard under a sky brilliant with stars. The house waited, warm and lit, no longer empty. Tomorrow would bring its own tasks and troubles. But tonight Travis Beckham was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The thaw came late that year, March arriving with stubborn cold that kept the valley locked in winter's grip longer than usual. Travis stood at the kitchen window watching ice break apart on the creek, listening to the crack and groan of frozen water surrendering to spring. Behind him, Nolan sat at the table working through homework, pencil scratching across paper, his presence so familiar now that Travis sometimes forgot the boy hadn't always been there. Ranger had weathered the winter magnificently, his coat thick and healthy, his strength fully returned. The horse had become something of a legend in Red Creek Valley, people driving out of their way to catch a glimpse of the animal who'd survived torture to become the key that unlocked truth. Travis had grown protective of those visits, careful about who he allowed near Ranger, unwilling to let the horse become a spectacle or a symbol when he was first and foremost a living being who deserved peace. The legal aftermath of everything that had happened continued to unfold in slow motion, as legal matters always did. Drummond had fled Montana entirely, his reputation destroyed and his business empire collapsed. Several of his former employees had taken plea deals, their testimony revealing a pattern of intimidation and fraud that extended far beyond what had happened at Copper Ridge. The county attorney had told Travis there might be additional restitution coming, but Travis had stopped thinking about the money. He had enough to run the ranch properly, enough to pay Nolan a fair wage and cover expenses with room to spare. More than that started to feel like excess. What occupied his thoughts now were different questions. How to make Copper Ridge not just survive but contribute something meaningful to the valley. The water rights he controlled weren't just a legal victory, they were a responsibility. Other ranchers depended on that aquifer, and Travis found himself in the unexpected position of steward for a resource that affected dozens of families. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure, this sudden weight of other people's livelihoods resting on decisions he'd make. Dr. Fontaine had become his sounding board for these questions, stopping by most evenings after her rounds to share coffee and conversation. Their friendship had deepened over the winter months, built on the foundation of shared work and mutual respect. She never pushed, never suggested their relationship should become something other than what it was, and Travis appreciated that restraint. He wasn't ready for complications, wasn't sure he ever would be. But having someone to talk to, someone whose judgment he trusted, made the isolation of ranch life feel less like loneliness and more like chosen solitude. One evening in early April, as the last snow melted from the high pastures, Iris arrived with news that shifted everything again. She sat at the kitchen table, accepted the coffee Travis poured, and said without preamble, "The Valley Association wants to create a water cooperative. They're asking if you'd be willing to transfer the aquifer rights to collective management, with Copper Ridge maintaining primary authority but sharing decision-making with other stakeholders." Travis absorbed this slowly, understanding the implications. It would mean giving up sole control, but it would also mean sharing the burden of responsibility. More than that, it would transform the water rights from potential source of conflict into foundation for cooperation. His uncle had held those rights close, suspicious of anyone who might take advantage. But Travis was beginning to understand that holding tight and holding together were different things entirely. "What do you think?" he asked Iris, valuing her perspective. She considered carefully before answering. "I think your uncle fought alone because he didn't trust anyone else to fight as hard as he did. But you've already proven you don't have to fight alone. This valley stood with you when you needed it. Maybe it's time to show you trust them to be good stewards of what you're protecting." It was the kind of wisdom Travis had come to expect from her, practical and profound in equal measure. He agreed to meet with the Valley Association, to hear their proposal fully before making any decisions. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, giving Travis time to think through what he wanted from any arrangement, what terms would honor his uncle's sacrifice while also serving the community's needs. Nolan had opinions too, unexpectedly thoughtful ones for a 15-year-old. Mr. Duncan held on to things so tight because he was afraid of losing them. The boy observed one evening while they repaired fence line. "But you can't actually keep anything by refusing to share it. My dad used to say that. Said the more you tried to control something, the quicker it slipped through your fingers. The boy's father had been a mechanic, Travis had learned over the winter months. Died in a car accident coming home from a late-night emergency call, trying to help a stranded motorist. Nolan carried his father's tools everywhere, kept them maintained with religious devotion, and sometimes Travis would catch the boy talking to wrenches and screwdrivers as if they might answer back. Grief worked in strange ways, Travis understood now. Sometimes it made you hold tighter, sometimes it taught you to let go. The Valley Association meeting was held at the community center, the same room where Travis had first stood before his neighbors and asked for their support. But the dynamics were different now, the desperation replaced by something steadier. Travis presented his thinking clearly. He was willing to transfer the aquifer rights to collective management, but wanted certain protections in place. Priority access for agricultural use over commercial development. Environmental oversight to ensure the aquifer wasn't depleted. And Copper Ridge maintaining a leadership role in the cooperative. Honoring his uncle's legacy, while acknowledging that legacy belonged to the valley as much as to any individual. The debate was spirited but not hostile. Neighbors offering perspectives Travis hadn't considered, raising concerns that needed addressing. Jack Morrison, the county surveyor, helped draft language that satisfied the legal requirements while preserving the spirit of what Travis proposed. By evening's end, they had the framework for an agreement that would make the water rights a shared trust rather than private property. It would take months to finalize, lawyers to review, votes to be taken. But the principle was established, and Travis felt lighter for having made the choice. Pastor Hugh walked him to his truck afterward, the old pastor's face thoughtful in the parking lot lights. Your uncle would have hated this, you know? He spent years fighting to keep everything under his control. Hugh smiled. But I think he'd also be proud. Takes more courage to share power than to hoard it. You're building something he couldn't, not because he lacked the vision but because he lacked the trust. You're finishing what he started, but you're doing it your way. Travis drove home through darkness that felt full of possibility rather than threat. The valley spread around him, other ranches marked by distant lights, families settling in for the night in homes that would now be secured by shared stewardship of resources none of them could protect alone. It felt right in a way Travis couldn't fully articulate, this transformation of his uncle's solitary battle into collective responsibility. Spring work consumed the following weeks. Fencing to repair, equipment to service, fields to prepare for planting. Travis had decided to try something different with the land, converting several acres to native prairie grasses that would improve soil health while providing hay. It was a longer-term investment than conventional crops, but Travis was thinking in longer terms now. Not just next season but next decade, building something that would outlast him. Nolan had begun talking about the future too. His plans extending beyond high school graduation now just a year away. He wanted to study agricultural engineering, he told Travis one day while they worked on an irrigation system. Wanted to figure out how to make small ranches more sustainable, more resilient against the economic pressures that were crushing family operations throughout the West. Travis found himself thinking about succession, about what would happen to Copper Ridge when he was gone. The ranch could be Nolan's someday, if the boy wanted it. That conversation could wait, but knowing it was possible gave Travis's work additional meaning. Ranger had become an unexpected teacher in his own right. Travis had started allowing carefully supervised visits from children in the valley, letting them see the horse up close, learn his story. The scars on Ranger's shoulder sparked difficult conversations about cruelty and survival, about how pain could be transformed into purpose. More than once, Travis saw kids trace those scars with gentle fingers, saw understanding dawn in young faces. Sometimes the worst things that happened to you could become the most important things about you, not because they defined you but because they showed what you could overcome. One particular visit stood out. A girl of maybe 8, silent and withdrawn, whose parents whispered to Travis about trauma from abuse they were still working through with therapists and social workers. She approached Ranger with the cautious hunger of someone who understood suffering, and the horse lowered his head to her level with surprising gentleness. The girl laid her palm against those scars, and Travis saw something shift in her expression. Not healing exactly, but recognition. The understanding that survival was possible, that scars could be worn with dignity rather than shame. Her parents wept quietly, and Travis looked away to give them privacy. When they thanked him before leaving, the girl's mother could barely speak. "She hasn't talked about what happened to her, but she told us on the way here that if the horse could survive, maybe she could too." Travis watched their car disappear down the drive, understanding in that moment that Copper Ridge's purpose extended far beyond property lines or water rights. It was becoming a place where broken things learned to be whole again, where survival was celebrated rather than pitted. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that turned the valley golden, grasshoppers clicking in the tall grass, thunderstorms building over the mountains each afternoon. Travis had hired additional help for haying season, young people from neighboring ranches earning summer money, and the work felt communal in ways that satisfied something deep in him. They worked dawn to dusk, putting up hay that would feed Ranger and the small herd of cattle Travis had cautiously acquired, building stores against the next winter. Evenings were for rest and conversation. The hired hands gathered around a fire pit Travis had built near the barn, sharing stories and jokes and the easy camaraderie of shared labor. Nolan thrived in this environment, his natural leadership emerging as he taught others what Travis had taught him. Watching the boy instruct someone on proper fence repair technique, Travis felt something like paternal pride, though he was careful not to presume too much. Nolan had a mother who loved him, a father whose memory he honored. Travis was mentor, employer, friend, but not replacement for what the boy had lost. Dr. Fontaine's visits had become less frequent over the summer months, her schedule packed with work as animals throughout the valley required attention. But when she did stop by, usually late in the evening after her rounds, Travis found himself watching for her truck, found himself disappointed on nights when it didn't appear. He was careful not to examine these feelings too closely, not ready to name what they might mean. Iris seemed content with the ambiguity, never pushing for definition or commitment. They simply were in each other's orbit, and that was enough. August brought the county fair, and Travis found himself convinced to enter Ranger in the exhibition classes. Not competition, just demonstration, a chance for the valley to see how fully the horse had recovered. The fairgrounds were chaos and color, children with cotton candy, teenagers showing livestock, the smell of fried food and livestock and dust mixing in the summer heat. Travis led Ranger through the crowds, and people stopped to stare, to point, to whisper the story they'd heard. The exhibition ring fell silent when Travis and Ranger entered. He'd prepared nothing fancy, just basic demonstrations of the trust between them. Ranger following voice commands without a lead rope, standing calmly while children approached, lowering himself so a small girl with leg braces could sit on his back for just a moment, the child's face radiant with joy. It wasn't showy or dramatic, but the crowd understood what they were witnessing. The transformation of trauma into trust, of suffering into service. The judge, a weathered horseman from the next county over, approached afterward with suspiciously bright eyes. "That's the finest horsemanship I've seen in 40 years of judging. Not because of technique, but because of heart. That animal trusts you completely, and you've earned it." He pinned a blue ribbon to Ranger's halter, though there had been no competition. "This is for surviving, for showing the rest of us what's possible when we refuse to let cruelty win." Travis drove home that evening with the ribbon fluttering from his rearview mirror, Nolan beside him grinning, and allowed himself to feel uncomplicated pride. They'd come so far, he and Ranger, from that terrible night when he'd found the horse dying in filth. Every choice since then had led to this, to community and purpose and the bone-deep satisfaction of work that mattered. Fall arrived with its familiar rituals, the apple harvest at neighboring orchards, the first frost warning, the sense of year turning toward closure. The water cooperative agreement was finalized in September. Signatures gathered, legal documents filed. Copper Ridge's water rights were now held in trust for the valley, managed by a board Travis chaired but didn't control. His uncle would have hated it, the surrender of absolute authority. But Travis slept better knowing the responsibility was shared, that if something happened to him, the valley's water supply wouldn't be vulnerable to the next person who saw it as profit opportunity rather than sacred trust. The anniversary of his uncle's death came in October, A year since Duncan had died alone in the house Travis now called home. Pastor Hugh organized a memorial service, not somber but celebratory, acknowledging both the man's difficult nature and his unwavering commitment to protecting what mattered. Travis spoke briefly, finding words that felt true rather than flattering. His uncle had been stubborn, suspicious, impossible to know fully. But he'd also been right about what needed protecting, and brave enough to stand alone when no one else would stand with him. After the service, Travis walked to the north pasture, the place where everything had begun. The survey stakes were gone now, properly documented and protected by legal record rather than secrecy. But the land itself remained, golden grass moving in the wind, the spring still bubbling clear and cold. Travis stood at the spot where he'd first uncovered his uncle's hidden documents, remembering the surge of hope and terror he'd felt, understanding for the first time that this fight was real and the consequences enormous. Ranger had followed him up the hill, and the horse stood beside him now, both of them looking out over the valley spread below. From here you could see the changes beginning to take hold. New fences at neighboring ranches, repairs made possible by the stability the water cooperative provided. Young families moving back to properties their parents had been ready to abandon, seeing possibility where there had been only decline. The valley wasn't saved, exactly, but it was surviving. And survival, Travis had learned, was its own kind of victory. Winter came again, Travis's second at Copper Ridge, and this time he was ready for it. Hay stacked high, equipment serviced, the house properly insulated and warm. Nolan lived at the ranch full-time now, his mother having remarried and moved to a smaller place in town. The boy had his own room, his own responsibilities, his own emerging vision for what he might do with his life. They'd settled into rhythms that felt permanent, morning chores and evening meals and quiet evenings around the fire discussing plans for spring. Dr. Fontaine had become Iris at some point, the formality dropped without discussion. She spent Christmas Day at the ranch, helping Travis and Nolan cook a meal that was more ambition than skill, laughing at burnt edges and oversalted gravy. After dinner, they sat on the porch bundled in blankets, watching snow fall soft and steady, and Travis felt something he'd almost forgotten was possible. Contentment. Not the desperate happiness of crisis averted or victory achieved, but the quieter satisfaction of being exactly where he belonged, with people who mattered, doing work that gave his life shape and meaning. "Your uncle left you more than a ranch," Iris said quietly, her breath fogging in the cold air. "He left you a choice. You could have taken the easy path, sold out, walked away. Instead you chose the harder thing, and in choosing it, you became someone different than who you were when you arrived." She looked at him, her expression fond. "I don't think you realize how much you've changed this valley. Not just the water rights or stopping Drummond, but showing people that it's possible to build something worth keeping." Travis didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded, uncomfortable with praise but grateful for the observation. Nolan had fallen asleep in his chair, face peaceful in a way that still surprised Travis when he saw it. The boy who'd arrived on a battered motorcycle, all angles and grief and guardedness, had filled out with good food and hard work, had found something at Copper Ridge that allowed him to grieve without drowning, to remember his father without being paralyzed by loss. Spring came around again, the cycle continuing, and Travis marked time now not by seasons but by growth. Ranger graying slightly around the muzzle, still strong but showing his age. Nolan taller, his voice deepening, college applications starting to consume his attention. The ranch itself more established, systems running smoothly, the land responding to careful stewardship. Travis had started mentoring other young ranchers, sharing what he'd learned, passing on the knowledge Iris and Jack and others had given him. The valley's economy was stabilizing, families finding ways to make small operations viable through cooperation and shared resources. The story of Ranger and Copper Ridge had spread beyond Red Creek Valley, articles appearing in regional newspapers, a documentary filmmaker requesting access. Travis was careful about all of it, protective of privacy while understanding that some stories needed telling. Not for glory but for hope, showing others facing similar struggles that resistance was possible, that corporate pressure and economic hardship weren't inevitably triumphant. Sometimes the small operations survived. Sometimes the land stayed in the hands of people who loved it rather than those who saw it as commodity. On a morning in May, Travis walked out to find Ranger standing at the fence, ears pricked toward something Travis couldn't see. The horse had developed this habit over the winter, periodically staring into the middle distance as if watching for something or someone. Travis had learned not to dismiss these moments, had come to trust that Ranger sensed things human awareness couldn't detect. He followed the horse's gaze and saw nothing remarkable, just the familiar sweep of valley and sky. But Ranger remained focused, and Travis waited with him, patient now in ways he'd never been before. After several minutes, a truck appeared on the far road, heading toward town. It slowed as it passed the ranch, and Travis recognized the driver. One of Drummond's former employees, the one who'd taken the plea deal, testifying against his boss in exchange for reduced charges. He'd served his time, was building a new life doing legitimate work. The truck continued past without stopping, but Travis saw the man's nod of acknowledgement, a gesture that held something like respect or maybe just recognition that they'd both survived what could have destroyed them. Ranger relaxed once the truck disappeared, returning to grazing as if nothing had happened. Travis laughed softly, understanding that the horse had been watching not with alarm but with awareness, noting the passage of someone whose story was tangled with theirs. It was another kind of lesson, this readiness without aggression, this watchfulness without paranoia. His uncle had lived in constant defensive posture, seeing threats in every shadow. But Travis was learning a different way, alert but not afraid, prepared but not paranoid. The years continued their march, faster now that Travis had stopped fighting them. Nolan graduated high school with honors, accepted to Colorado State's agricultural program with a scholarship that covered most expenses. The goodbye was harder than Travis expected, having grown so accustomed to the boy's presence that the house felt empty without him. But Nolan promised to return summers, to bring what he learned back to Copper Ridge, and Travis knew he would. The boy was loyal in ways that went bone deep, incapable of abandoning what he loved. Iris's presence in Travis's life had shifted gradually from friendship into something neither of them rushed to name. She kept her own place in town, her independent life and practice, but spent increasing time at the ranch. They worked well together, comfortable silences punctuated by easy conversation, and Travis found himself grateful for the lack of pressure to define or formalize what they had. It was enough to have someone who understood, who shared the work and the quiet evenings, who knew when to speak and when silence was its own communication. Ranger aged with dignity, his pace slower but his spirit undimmed. Travis had turned down multiple offers to purchase the horse, collectors willing to pay enormous sums for an animal who'd become legendary. But Ranger wasn't for sale at any price, would live out his days at Copper Ridge, and when the time came, would be buried in the north pasture near the spring he'd helped protect. Travis had already chosen the spot, had already decided what the marker would say. Not just dates and name, but acknowledgement of what the horse had meant. Guardian, teacher, friend. The water cooperative thrived under shared stewardship, the valley's ranches more secure than they'd been in decades. Young families were returning, seeing possibility where their parents had seen only decline. The elementary school that had been threatened with closure now had enough students to justify expansion. Pinewood's Main Street, which had been slowly dying, showed signs of revitalization. None of it was dramatic transformation, just steady incremental improvement, the kind that lasted because it was rooted in community rather than imposed from outside. Travis's 40th birthday came without much fanfare. Just dinner with Iris and a handful of neighbors who'd become friends. No cake or gifts, just good food and better company. Conversation ranging from weather predictions to water table measurements to whose daughter was dating whose son. The ordinary currency of community life, valuable precisely because it was ordinary, because it meant Travis belonged here in ways he'd never belonged anywhere else. That night, lying in bed in the room that had been his uncle's, Travis thought about the journey that had brought him here. The desperation that had driven him back to Red Creek Valley. The dying horse he'd almost walked away from. The choice to stay when staying seemed impossible. And all the moments since then, the small decisions that had accumulated into a life he was proud of, work that mattered, relationships that sustained him. His uncle's journal still sat on the nightstand, its pages familiar now from repeated reading. Travis opened it to the final entry, words he'd memorized but still needed to see written in his uncle's careful hand. Someone will come after me. Someone will understand why this mattered. And they'll have the courage to finish what I started. Travis had finished it, but in finishing had discovered that endings were also beginnings. His uncle's fight had become Travis's foundation, the platform from which to build something new. Not just preservation of what had been, but creation of what could be. Morning came, as mornings do, and Travis rose to meet it. Ranger was waiting at the fence, breath steaming in the cool air, patient for breakfast and whatever else the day might bring. Travis fed him, checked water troughs, made coffee while watching the sun paint the valley gold. Iris's truck pulled in just after dawn, and Travis smiled at the familiar sound of her arrival. They had work to do, fences to check, decisions to make about the cooperative's next steps. But first there was coffee on the porch, quiet companionship as the valley woke around them. This was it, Travis understood. This was the life his uncle had been protecting, the possibility he'd died defending. Not grand or glamorous, but real in ways that mattered. Work and land and community and the stubborn refusal to let the world be diminished by those who saw only profit and power. His uncle had held the line alone until it killed him. But Travis didn't have to hold it alone. Had learned the difference between solitary and solidarity, between isolation and chosen connection. Ranger lifted his head from grazing, ears forward, watching something only he could see. Travis had learned to trust those moments, to understand that some awareness went deeper than human perception could fathom. The horse was old now, would not last many more years. But his legacy was written into every acre of Copper Ridge, every family sustained by the water cooperative, every young person who'd learned from his story that survival was possible even after cruelty, that scars could become maps to something better than what had been lost. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill, and Travis stood to begin the day's work. There was always work, would always be work, that was the nature of land and livestock and life itself. But it was good work, purposeful work, and Travis went to it with something he'd lacked for most of his adult life. He went to it with gratitude, for second chances and stubborn horses and communities that stood together when standing alone would have meant defeat. For uncles who held impossible lines until someone came along who could hold them differently. For boys who needed somewhere to grieve and grow. For women who understood that love didn't have to be complicated to be real. Copper Ridge Ranch would outlast him, Travis knew. Would pass to Nolan or someone else who understood what it represented. But for now it was his to steward, his to protect, his to share with the valley that had claimed him when he'd been broken and lost and looking for any reason to keep going. The ranch had given him that reason, or maybe Ranger had, or maybe it was the accumulated weight of all the small choices that had brought him here. It didn't matter which. What mattered was showing up each day and doing the work that needed doing, holding what needed holding, letting go of what needed release. The valley spread around him, ancient and patient, holding its secrets and its stories. Travis was part of that story now. His chapter added to all the others, his choices rippling out in ways he'd never fully see. But he could feel them, could sense the slow change that came from refusing to surrender what mattered. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything he'd been searching for without knowing he was searching. Found in the last place he'd thought to look. Found at home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.